Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this Google Partnership Hangout. My name is Ajay. I work as the monetization specialist focused on the Australia New Zealand market. Today, we're here to focus on monetization, all things monetization related to AdSense, related to DFP, our new rebranding around what we're doing with the new ad manager and AMP. Today, with me, we have four other esteemed guests who are going to be sharing their expertise with you. And we are talking to you from across four different locations. So I hope you can bear with us. And we got the real experts in today. So I'm going to start off by introducing them one by one. First up, Aish.
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Aish, and I work out of the Google Sydney office. I work with both channel partners like Acqua Media and Publift, who you'll be hearing from very soon, and some individual publishers too, some of who I think are on this live stream. So yeah, I work both on the AdX side and the Google Ad Manager too. So that is my role in a gist, and looking forward to talking to you a lot more in detail about AMP. Over to you, Ajay.
Thank you, Aish. Next up, we have Jatin.
Hello everyone, I am Jatin. I work out of the Google New Delhi office and I work with web publishers in driving and scaling AMP adoption. I work with publishers of all sizes and I'm really looking forward to interacting with all of you and answering some of your questions on AMP. Over to you, Ajay.
Thank you. Next up, we have Dan from Publift.
Hello everyone, I'm Dan and I work at Publift based here in Sydney. We're a Google certified publishing partner and we also have built our own ad tech platform, and today I'm excited to be presenting all things DFP. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And last, we have Ben.
Thank you, Ajay. My name is Ben. We're here from Acqua Media. I'm in the Hong Kong office. We're a Google certified partner in the region, and we help with monetization of pubs in the region. Thank you, Ajay.
Okay, just a few things to keep in mind, guys. Please make sure to keep sending us your questions. Please fill out that form. We will try and answer as many questions as possible. And looking forward to reading all your questions and hope you enjoy this session. Thank you very much for dialing in. I'm quickly going to start presenting my screen. So see you all in the end. Okay, so first up, this is the agenda. Like I mentioned, we're going to start off with AdSense optimization with Acqua Media, which will be led by Ben. Second will be DFP by Publift, led by Dan. AMP by the Google team, Aish and Jatin. And last, we have the Q&A. So take it away, Ben.
Thank you, Ajay. So thank you everyone for listening in. We have 5 topics today in the agenda. Let's move to the agenda page. Yes, thank you. All right. So the 5 agenda today will be surrounding the business of AdSense. We'll talk about native ads, the ad availability, how does it help your monetization? And number 3 will be on AdSense auto ads. Number 4 will be the content level CPM. How do you improve your monetization capability by tying it to the pages or the authors of the page? Number 5 will be a quick run on DFP responsive tags, which is a pretty common question we get from publishers within the region. So here, I'm sure many of you have already seen this slide. Mainly just want to do a recap for those that have not seen this before. Native ads formats have changed quite a few times in the last year or so. Right now, the 3 main formats are in-feed, in-article, and match content. So in-feed is where listings. So you might have a listing page of all your articles, and you can put an ad that looks almost exactly like your listings within the page. So it will look very similar to the surrounding, therefore the native behavior. For an article, that's when you normally put maybe a 300 by 250 medium rank or large rank in the middle of your article, maybe between paragraphs. So now you can put a better looking native ad that you can design to your own favorite spec and put it there. And that will also make it look a little bit more like the social networks that everyone has been visiting. So from a user experience, it's more friendly. Then you have the match content. This is more of a function to improve your user experience, improve your user engagement, and not so much directly on generating revenue. But Google has also have a way to put ads in there that will look like listings. So this is another way to grow traffic at the same time grow your page overall CPM. Next page. So this is an example of some of the tests that we have ran for some of our clients in the past. These tests are to replace display ads with native ads, and simple as that. The same position, same size, same everything. So you can pretty much call this an A/B test. So on the left side, you can see some of the categories that we run in. So it works in pretty much all type of content. So you have finance, news, sports, mobile, gadgets, that type of tech content. And in the columns, you will see display ads CPM or the RPM, and native ads RPM, and the lift in there. So this, bear in mind that the lift itself is maybe in the teens, so it does not always guarantee a lift in our experience. You do have to do some tuning in the way of how these native ads look, especially the title, or the overall, the color, and just the usual, to make it look like the rest of your website. And that's the important part. So if you do it well, and if you have the time to play around to improve it over time, you will most likely see lifts. But of course, we're not going to double your revenue, things like that, just to set the proper expectation. But we do see consistent lifts over what we normally see in display ads. Next page. So here are some of the learnings. So how do you have, what's the feedback mechanism that you know you're doing the right thing? So number one is native ads is not really meant to trick your readers. It's of course, initially, a lot of native ad providers will say that it looks just like ads, put it in there, you make more money, and users might click on it a lot. So you will see a very high click-through rate on native ads as compared to display. Normal display click-through rate maybe 0.1, 0.2%. Native ads maybe twice that, or sometimes even higher, depending how and where you put it. So definitely check your Google Analytics, check your bounce rate to make sure that users are not offended. Number two is native ads are, especially the match content, is there to provide value to your site, to increase the average session duration. That's a field in your Google Analytics. So that's something to check to see if it really improves your user engagement. Number three and number four are quite similar. Maybe I should talk about number four first. There's an experiment part in AdSense that you guys might have tried it before. So definitely enable that. It's really easy to do, not much work required, and definitely check your ad RPM to make sure that you know which winner is the one that maybe you can just switch over 100% to the winner. And also manually mix it up a bit. Maybe put one ad within 2 paragraphs, or maybe break the paragraph into a higher granularity and put more ads in there to see if people actually bounce. And always balance your bounce rate with your ad RPM increment. So that's usually how we do this. The next page. So this is the second topic I want to talk about. So the last one was about making more money from trying native ads. This one is actually applied on everything. It's not just on native ads. Apply on video, apply on display, etc. So viewability plays a huge part of your capability of making more money on the same ad unit. But if you put it on different locations on the page. So availability, the definition again, you probably heard of this, is when 50% more than half of the creative pixel is viewed for more than 1 second. Now, other companies might have different definitions, but the theories goes like that. So it's whether you see a lot of the area of the ad for a fixed period of time. The goal is to achieve over 50% overall account level active view, because that seems to be the average of most of the geos that we work in. And you want to be on the better half of the entire geo. For any single ad unit, make sure your individual ad unit availability or active view is above 40%. That is quite low. Most of the cases will try to achieve it to be more than 50 or even higher. So how are you supposed to do that? So test to place ads in different locations. So again, all the way to the bottom, follow the eyeballs. That's the trick. So make sure that if possible, if your CMS or your website structure is able to accommodate that, definitely put it within your content. Maybe break out the paragraphs. That's where the eyeball is. That's where people come to see your site for. And put it within listings. That's what native ads are created in the first place, is to make it look like the environment, surrounding environment. And also on desktop, put it on the left side more than on the right-hand side, because right-hand side is traditionally where all the ads are. If you put it on the left-hand side, people will perceive that as part of your content. Therefore, click-through rate would usually be 3 times higher. Yes, 3 times. And remove the low active view ads. So this is more about quantity. In fact, if you have a lot of ads on the bottom, and if the page is not lazy loaded, well, I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next point. So you will bring down your overall active view, and that's not a good thing for the entire account. It will even affect the ad units that have high active view if you have a lot of low active view ad units or impressions. And lazy loading meaning to delay the loading of the content or the ad until people scroll down to that specific area. So that helps to decrease the chance that people never see your ad, but the ad's loaded. So your overall active view will increase, your CPM will increase dramatically. Let's go to the next page to see an example. Okay, so here are 3 columns you can see from the top. AV is active view rate. These are cases where it's a proof case of availability helps with your revenue. So on the left column, middle column, right-hand column. So on the left column, the active view is 60%, and then in the middle, 51%, and then it drops down to 44%. That seems to be a pretty narrow range, but it actually makes a huge difference, as you can see from the RPM. So 60%, you get $1.12, and at 44%, it dropped down to about a quarter of such. So this is maybe linear, but to me, it just looks exponential. So anywhere below 50%, you're going to suffer a lot. So it makes a lot of sense to make your page lazy load, or at least have a way so that if people don't often go to a certain portion of that page, make sure you don't put an ad there so it does not affect all the other good ad units within your account. So that it doesn't mean to put more ads. It's less ads, but more good ads. So that's the key part. Next page, please. Okay, so this is the third topic. We're right in the middle of the presentation here. So auto ads is something that you guys have probably all tried and used. The execution of auto ads is very simple, as illustrated by the guide directly within the Google AdSense UI. You don't have to know any coding. You can just put it anywhere between the head. So this is a great way that Google will actually decide where and how to show what type of format of ads. Next slide. So here, these are some of the things you got to consider when you set this up. That there are some decisions that you got to make. Usually, we just turn everything on pretty much. The good thing is you don't have to remove any AdSense ads at first. So automatically, AdSense will pretty much check where you have already put ads, what are enabled, what are not. For example, some sticky ads, they're not enabled, or there's no vignette, meaning like interstitial ads, then auto ads will automatically go to the places where you have not proactively or manually added AdSense tags. So that helps where we miss, pretty much. The next page. So in article, native ads actually beat banners. So maybe it's too small down there, but in the red bracket, if we can see this clearly, it actually shows almost double the CPM between in article native versus in article display. So again, here native ad does help a lot in improving your overall CPM versus possibly normal display ads in the exact same ad position. But overall, if you were to think, okay, I already have a lot of AdSense ads all over the place. Do I remove them all and just use auto ads? No, you don't do that. Normally, as you probably have heard from Google events in the past, keep your best performing ads. So in most cases, maybe 90% of revenue come from 20% of your ad units. So definitely keep all those 90% of your revenue and don't move those tags, and maybe just remove some of those tags that are just laggers. They may be attributed to be 10 or 20% of your revenue. So cut those away and then let auto ad replace them. So that's probably one of the best action that you can do immediately to improve your overall revenue. Okay, next slide. So this is just one page on the capability of linking your Google Analytics with your AdSense to optimize from a page level. So here, there's a pretty large publisher, and on the right, on the left-hand or the left column, you have the page. So these are the page sections or individual articles within that website. And on the right, red bracket, you can see it says publisher revenue per 1,000 sessions. So this column here shows your capability to monetize or the efficiency of monetization per page. So in a lot of websites, the articles are written by different authors, different content providers, and so forth. And you can see that different content generate very different RPM. So this is a good way of maybe tie it back to how you incentivize the writers or the editors. Some editors generate 10 times the RPM as other editors. So definitely incentivize or manage them differently. If other contents are in-house or acquired, this is a good way to manage your business more dynamically. And this is free and easy to link up within GA and AdSense. You can go to Google Analytics in the setting, and you can enter your or link to your AdSense ID. As long as the login between the two are the same and they are both administrator, then you can link the two. And once they're linked, you can go to the behavior section, and you will see this report. So this is a very actionable and very fun to watch report. The next page, please. So this is the last topic, just going to skim through. A lot of the cases, actually very often, we hear about, okay, we're using DFP and we're also using AdSense or AdX, doesn't matter. But AdSense is easy because it's auto-responsive to tag. If you rotate your device or you change your devices, do anything to your device, everything is responsive as you rotate, as you move around. But in DFP, it doesn't really work like that. Some of the times your 728 or leaderboard will show up on your mobile or vice versa. It might break, things like that. So it's always a challenge to make DFP codes or tags truly responsive. The next page. So this is just a quick review of how do you make it responsive. So with AdSense, you can see that pretty much everything's auto, it's all good. But in DFP, everything is sort of, you got to customize it manually, you got to predefine it in advance and a bunch of stuff. And yes, and you do need some front-end coding experience, JavaScript stuff. And is it really 100% responsive even after you've done everything? Actually, it's a no, because there's always cases where that's what the next page we'll go to. I'll show you a little bit on the next page. Okay, so here are some of the things where I've learned when debugging our clients' DFP for truly responsive experience. A lot of these, so one might ask, so why would I use DFP? I've been using AdSense, it's perfect, and I don't think I need DFP. Then this is not a problem. But for anyone that have the need for an ad server, that need to serve the direct sales ads or their own house ads or whoever partners ads they want to show in there, then you might need this part, especially when responsive capability is crucial. So some of the tips or things we have learned that we want to share is the actual device size is not the browser size. So when you go to maybe Google support, there's many of the cases that we talk about device size, we talk about browser size. These are not the same thing, and they need to be configured differently. That's one part that we learned. If you don't understand what this is about, it's totally normal. My tech guys know. Actually, I don't directly understand this, and it's for a good reason, because you got to be a little bit tech to understand this. But and the second part is map the ad size to the browser size, and not so much to the device and things like that. So there's many different sizes, and that's the hard part. You got to understand how it all linked up together, and then also the mapping have to be named pretty clearly. Otherwise, it's really difficult to debug. So a lot of these things are just typical programmer etiquettes. So and the next slide. This will be the last one, I believe. So, and then there are, okay, I understand all of that stuff, and I can do that. But for some reason, the company that I work for or my website, the header is not editable as part of the CMS or something. So if that's a problem, that becomes a completely different animal. Then we have to code everything separately on the body part. And that is definitely something we can help. So that's all for now, and I hope that some of these things are also problems that you might have experienced, and if there's any help that we can help or who can help, any of the partners can help, please let us know. Thank you very much.
Thanks a ton, Ben. Thank you for sharing such insightful things around AdSense and DFP responsive. I think that was great. Anyway, now moving on, we will be moving to Dan from Publift. Take it away, Dan.
Awesome. Thanks very much, guys. Hey, everyone. As mentioned before, I'm from Publift, and we're a certified publishing partner of Google's, and really excited here to be speaking to you about all things DFP, or as what we now call Ad Manager, and why it's worth implementing for your business or your website. And next slide. Just a breakdown of the agenda. So I'll be taking you through the basics of Ad Manager, some of the core terms that you'll need to understand, and a range of the benefits that it can have for you immediately as a publisher. Next up will be some really healthy tips for optimization. That's how you can optimize your current networks, how you could set up roadblocks for campaigns, and the power of DFP First Look. And finally, I'm excited to take you through how Publift Tech can make this even more simple. Next slide. So Ad Manager, what is it? It's really how you streamline your ad management. It's a complete platform offered by Google that gives you all the necessary tools to manage your digital advertising. And again, if you'll notice in the last 2 weeks, if you have Ad Manager, it's recently changed from DFP over to Ad Manager. So forgive me if I mix up the two naming conventions. It's just a force of habit. And at Publift, we really see this as sort of a next step up from AdSense. If you want to start managing both direct and programmatic, it's probably the best tool to be able to do this. Next slide. So Ad Manager allows you to stay relevant in a market that's constantly flooded with new technologies and strategies. And by adopting Ad Manager, you won't really be left behind. I've highlighted a few small key benefits which can make a direct impact to your site without the need for much experience. The first is that you can actually traffic other networks and direct campaigns at the same time through the one ad server. You can run multiple buyer or demand sources, both programmatically and direct. And that's really going to be healthy for increasing your CPM and overall revenue. Next up is you can promote your own in-house advertising campaigns or products. So you may have a newsletter, magazine, or event that you want to promote for the month. You could actually traffic a proportion of your impressions to that. And lastly is you're able to apply detailed targeting to your campaign. So that could be specific pages, specific categories, or geography. Next slide, thank you. So the way we like to think of Ad Manager is it's like a container that holds a wealth of information and capabilities for digital advertising. It gives you all the necessary tools to display your ads for all channels, such as video, desktop, in-app, or mobile. And in order to really understand the next sort of tips for optimization, I think it's healthy to know these 4 basic terms. The first is your inventory, or what we call ad units. And if you think of your website like a magazine, this is essentially just the advertising space you have available to sell on your site. Next is the GPT tags, or Google Publisher tags, and it's snippets of code placed on your pages to call ads from DFP. And it's very similar to AdSense tags, so you're not going to have an issue putting them on your site. Next up is trafficking and campaigning. And this is the process of setting up and managing ad campaigns. So you may know this as maybe a campaign manager within the business. And that has 3 components. First is an order. So the order really is an object that holds general information about the ad campaign, such as the currency or maybe the salesperson, and that contains the line items. So a line item is exactly the details or specifics of the order, such as targeting, and the line items then house the creatives. And a creative, finally, is what represents the actual ad. So if the ad is hosted by Ad Manager, this object holds the actual image bytes, flash files, or custom HTML tags. And finally is the power of Ad Manager's reporting. So you can check on active campaigns to see how they're delivering and report on completed ones. Next slide. I think in order to understand how you can best monetize your inventory in Ad Manager, it's best to understand the different priority levels and the power of dynamic allocation. So this is how Ad Manager actually decides to serve ads. The beauty of Ad Manager is that you can set up your line items at different priorities, whether it be guaranteed or non-guaranteed. Now, although this graph can look quite confusing, it's really quite simple. If you understand the difference between each level, you can really manipulate your network to get the best return for your inventory. The top left-hand side of the slide shows the guaranteed line items. So this is typically your sponsorship and standard campaigns, and they are generally associated with directly sold campaigns. So an example would be if you're a sporting website and it's coming up to a grand final weekend, you may have a direct advertiser wanting to sell tickets on your site. You can actually give that advertiser all your impressions at a guaranteed sponsorship level for the days leading up to the game. Under these priority levels is your non-guaranteed line items, which are typically programmatic buyers, which an example is AdSense or in-house campaigns. So the main programmatic priority level that we see is Google AdX, and the way we like to think of this is essentially just the big brother of AdSense. And there's other levels such as network, bulk, price priority, and house. And the cool thing about Ad Manager is that you can optimize these priorities and get the most out of every impression. Now, the driving force behind this on the next slide is what we like to call dynamic allocation. So just next slide, please. So dynamic allocation is a yield maximizing capability that allows Ad Exchange to compete in real time with line items booked in Ad Manager as either remnant or guaranteed. So the graph on the right illustrates 5 simple steps of how dynamic allocation actually works. And it's very simple. The first step is that the website makes an ad call to DFP or Ad Manager. The Ad Manager then selects the top guaranteed line item and creates a temporary CPM. Now, this can be based on a number of different things, how much of the line item that it has left to deliver, what type of user it is. The third step is the ad server then chooses the highest CPM remnant line item. So these are the non-guaranteed ones, which can be price priority, house, and such. And finally, AdX is called to see if it can beat both CPMs. And the fifth step is the line item with the highest CPM wins. Now, by enabling competition between Ad Manager guaranteed and non-guaranteed line items, it maximizes the efficiency and ultimately increases your revenue. Next slide. So the first easy optimization that you can make today is your network competition and manipulating the values. So this example is a third-party network line item set up in DFP. It's set at non-guaranteed price priority 12 with a rate of $2. When an ad request is returned to DFP, it uses the line item priority level to determine what creative to show. So in this instance, there's no guaranteed impressions booked, so the price priority type can compete. As the impression value is set to $2, this tells Ad Manager that the network is willing to pay $2 for the impression. This may not be the case. In this example, AdX was willing to pay $1.75, but because the impression was sent to the network at $2, there's some lost value there. So specifically, the network is actually willing to pay $1.50, so there's a lost value again of 25 cents. A quick way to check this is you can go into your network UI login and just look at the average CPM. Next slide. So there's two simple actions you can take to rectify this and get more value out of AdX and your networks. The first would be lowering the value CPM, and that will give AdX a broader scope to compete. In this example, we set the new value at $1.75, and we found this value again from the network's dashboard. And the second option that we could do is set a frequency cap, and it will result in less impressions being sent to the network. And the idea behind that is to increase the price they're willing to pay. The result, AdX was able to compete with the lower value and actually beat it on CPM. Now, a growing trend for publishers is to use other sort of methods such as header bidding, but again, these can be tricky to implement and can influence your page load speed. Next slide. Next up is AdX floor pricing. So a simple mistake that could be costing you a lot of revenue is having too high floor prices set up. So by changing your floor prices, it's, again, a really simple way to increase your revenue. Now, this example, in the top half of the slide, there's a $2 floor, and it receives 500,000 ad requests, and the coverage is 60%. So the revenue is $600. Now, the reason the coverage is only 60% is because the floor is blocking out some impressions coming through the network. In the lower example, there's a $1.50 floor. Now, we've got the same amount of ad requests, but the coverage here has increased to 80%, and you're now making $700. So it's a 14% increase. So by simply tweaking the floor, you can increase coverage. What we hear from a lot of publishers is that they may want higher floors to encourage higher ad quality. What we see is the floor that a lot of publishers deem to kind of attribute to good quality ads is generally a lot higher than what it actually has to be. So on the next slide, we have the next tip, and that's how you can just set up a roadblock. So a roadblock is the ability to serve several creatives from a line item together on the same page, and they're typically served in a directly sold campaign, so it may be 100% share of voice. One thing to note is when you're setting up a roadblock, you want to book an impression for each creative. So in this example, there's 3 creatives, that'd be 3 impressions. And next slide, thank you. Now this is really just a simple line item adjustment. So in order to traffic line items to run as a roadblock, the display creative settings must be set to as many as possible or all. Now, a couple of things to point out. AdX line items don't compete against line items with as many as possible delivery, and you need to have guaranteed roadblocks enabled in your DFP network. Next slide, thank you. So DFP first look is something that we at Publift particularly have seen really, really good returns for our publishers. So you're able to use first look to maximize your yield by allowing preferred access to inventory for select buyers in Ad Exchange. So it really just captures incremental revenue opportunities from high CPM buyers programmatically. So what you're doing is you're exposing more revenue to high value demand, and you're increasing that yield through competition. I think the really good part about it is the fact that you don't have to make any changes to line items or tags on the page. It doesn't add any latency. It's going to decrease your unfilled impressions, and you don't need passbacks. So a working example of this would be a site has direct orders, let's say at $40 CPM, and their programmatic revenue CPM is a lot lower. I mean, a big reason behind this is the fact that direct campaigns are seeing what we deem as a better quality ad impression or user. So by activating first look, the programmatic buyers are able to see the impression and decide whether they want to match or beat the direct floor price. Now, what we do hear a lot with first look is the fear of publishers, say, having a good relationship with their advertisers, and they're thinking, hang on a second, I don't want to let programmatic impressions affect my campaign. There are things that you can do to not serve first look to 100% sponsorships. So there are ways that you can always guarantee your direct advertisers. Next slide, please. So this is just 3 really simple steps to set up First Look in your account. So the first is you're going to have to go into your admin global settings and make sure that you have a linked ad exchange account, and you just tick the default for dynamic allocation box. The next step is to actually go into your rules, so First Look pricing, and set up your First Look rules or make specific ad units available to First Look. Now, what we do at Publift is we really try to go in deep or build what we call a tiered system. So we allow different rules and different prices for different device types or different ad units or where the unit might sit on the page. And lastly is how you can report on First Look, and that's just going to your AdX historical. You change the transaction type to First Look, and you can see the results. Next slide. This is a specific case study. So in January 2018, we began working with Australian Frequent Flyer, and they basically had direct advertising only at high CPMs with high floor rates, and they didn't want remnant ads as they were deemed low quality. So what we came in and did was used Google's First Look and activate it for a lot of their inventory. It gave them access to brand new programmatic buyers that weren't seeing these impressions before. It decreased their unfilled impressions and resulted in a higher AdX CPM. Next slide. So the effect that that had on him was 200% year-on-year revenue. So that's just a matter of exposing his site to a whole new channel of buyers that wasn't there before. Next slide, thank you. So Publift has essentially developed an outsourced ad management platform known as Fuse. That's just to make your life a little easier. So it's the result of us working with hundreds of publishers for the last few years, listening to some of maybe their pain points that they've had and consolidating this into a simple technology for them. So DFP has tons of other optimizations that can be made, but if it seems a little too complicated, or maybe you don't have the time, or you aren't able to kind of utilize exactly what it can do, then this might be a solution for you. So there's really just 4 simple steps if you want to explore this avenue. Next slide. The first is that we'd work with you on a new ad layout optimizations. So we work with hundreds of publishers from different setups, categories, and verticals. We've A/B tested ads all over the place and thus developed our own encyclopedia of best practices. So our team would work closely with you and your site to apply this knowledge. Now, I just want to highlight that we don't force any ad units to go in any positions that you wouldn't like, and we're very conscious of the site remaining user-friendly. Once the publisher has approved the ad layout, our product team can work to build the tags. Now, this involves building and mapping a complete new set of ad units with all the relative features. Now, the great thing is that it's still managed through DFP, so you can traffic your direct campaigns and resume things as normal. So built within the tags is technology such as exchange bidding, machine learning, security health systems. You're able to apply ad refresh and size mapping. And the driving force behind the Fuse tag is that once it's on the publisher's page, any tech changes such as new networks, size mapping, or ad refresh can be done on our end. Now, the above illustration on the right displays the inventory tab in our dashboard. And that's where you can go and get a breakdown of each ad unit and some of the features that it has, such as active sizes on each device, whether it's lazy loaded or has ad refresh, and the networks that are actively bidding. Next page, thank you. Third step is pretty simple. The publisher, or you guys, just need to add the Fuse tags and work with your developer to put it on your site. We've developed a really in-depth guide on how you can do this, and it's designed to make changes such as sticky units, infinite scroll, and custom targeting. The custom targeting is simply setting up DFP key values and that being passed to the tag. Now, our tech team works really closely with your development team to make sure you get the tags and they're up and performing. And something we get asked a lot is, can a publisher expect to drop in revenue initially after implementing the tags? Absolutely not. With the flick of a switch, you're onto Publift tech and there's no lost revenue. Now, once the tag's live, and the last step is really just to enjoy the results, you get access to our dashboard, and it provides performance from multiple partners consolidated into one. And we really just want you to step away from the Excel spreadsheets. Next slide, thanks, Adrian. So the result of Fuse really for us is 35% increase in net revenue for our publishers. That's an accumulation of different technologies, and really a driving force behind that is actually utilizing all the features in Google's ad manager that publishers just may simply not know about. our next slide. Thank you, Ajay. So yeah, I guess if you're wanting to take the next step in your web monetization and make your life a little easier, then please speak with us. We're based here in Sydney and I'm more than happy to have a coffee or jump on a call. And you're also able to book maybe a Google Hangout, an online present, or an online meeting to speak with us. So I hope you enjoyed the presentation and were able to take away some helpful tips to apply to your site. And by all means, you can also reach out to me directly. So thank you very much. And yes, enjoy the rest of the presentation.
Thanks a ton, Dan. That was really helpful and useful, very insightful. I learned a lot myself from that presentation. Next up, guys, we have the AMP presentation by the Google team. Just before we start off there, I just want to remind you, if you have any questions, please send them our way through the form, and we will try and answer as many as possible. Now we have Aish, who is based from the Sydney Google office, who's going to be walking us through AMP, which is otherwise known as Accelerated Mobile Pages. Take it away, Aish.
Perfect. Thank you, Ajay. Hello, everyone. I'm Aish, and I'm going to be chatting with you about AMP, which is Accelerated Mobile Pages. So next slide. What I'm going to be talking to you about mostly is why, what, and how should you get onto AMP? How do you maximize your revenue on AMP? Next slide. And kind of go a little bit into myth busting and talk to you about what are some of the preconceived notions that exist and how we can, what the reality behind that is. With that, let's jump right in. Ajay, next slide. Next slide. Perfect. Cool. So we have been talking about this for quite a while within Google in the real world, that this is a mobile first world and speed is important. So this has been, we've been hearing this for a few years now, but it is more so than ever. And users not only kind of demand this kind of mobile friendly behavior, but they also reward performance. So to give you an idea of what that means in today's world, if over 53% of mobile site visitors leave after 3 seconds of load time, so that's kind of the tolerance level that they are giving you. And about 75% of mobile sites that exist take over 10 seconds. So that is also when you think about opportunity and kind of standing out from the crowd. Doing mobile first and being mobile friendly is a very good way of creating and carving a niche for yourself. That said, next slide. When you think about yourself as a user, one of the things that you always see is that, you know, there are slow loading sites and you have unresponsive pages. So what you would see is the sites are often very slow, they're cluttered, and you have the content and ads not placed in sync with each other. So it makes for a very uncomfortable and not so seamless experience. And this kind of can have an impact on the monetization aspect too. But when you think of yourself as a business, next slide, please, you also realize that you require a large development team to put together a big, mobile-friendly site and have like a development team with specialized skill sets. So you're taking up a lot of time and effort from what you really want to do. So we definitely recognize that gap, which is why AMP came into being in the first place. So I'd like to, next slide, introduce to you AMP. And what we mean by AMP, Accelerated Mobile Pages, is that it essentially is an open source initiative created by Google to enable a much more better, faster web and have a more seamless experience with users. So it would be beautiful, it would be easy to monetize, easy to create and manage for publishers like yourself. Next slide. So what does AMP do for you guys? Just kind of taking a step back, we want to create a very seamless experience. So as a result, what AMP would have is nearly instantaneous loading. You would have a much more stylish and flexible experience on mobile sites. And we not only create this for just your sites, but also for you to distribute your content. So we have partnerships with typical sites that you would use for distribution. So on the likes of LinkedIn, Twitter, Pinterest, and so on. And this is a good way for you to not only create AMP content, but also then distribute it quite seamlessly. Next slide. This makes sense. So AMP is continuing to evolve. It was launched in 2016, and since then we have had over 4 billion plus AMP pages totally. And when you think about it, every single week we have about 55 million AMP pages coming on live. So that's an incredible amount of AMP content coming live, and this is kind of what we are seeing as the future, with billions of pages getting onto AMP. Next slide. So with those staggering numbers, it is quite obvious that there is a reason that people are coming onto it. And just talking you through what those reasons are, we see people who spend 2x more amount of time on an AMP page versus a non-AMP page. So that's an incredible amount of user engagement that you are then increasing. With respect to if you do sell on your site, you can expect up to a 20% increase in sales conversions. So again, a significant increase in volume based on just the way that your site looks. Again, based on whether traffic or page visits is important to you, we're also seeing significant increases on those lines too. Next slide. Just talking you through some examples of people who are doing AMP and some really big brands in the industry. So we definitely are not the only ones who are just talking about it and getting onto it. There's some we have the likes of the Washington Post, Time, and some other examples on the slide who have come onto AMP and are seeing significant business results. So you would eventually end up seeing an increased engagement, retention by going onto AMP, and eventually leading that to an audience growth for yourself and increase in monetization. So next slide. Pivoting on to what and how about AMP, and moving on to how you can increase your revenue on AMP. And that is dependent on 3 main factors. The first one's traffic. The second, AMP implementation and UX, and lastly, ads implementation on AMP. So let's jump right in. Let's kickstart with traffic to AMP sites. Next slide. Now, most people think only about search traffic and essentially just having those pages on AMP when you think about AMP traffic pages. Now, just kind of like sharing a little bit more of insights and best practices that we see. Next slide. Just doing that, just doing search traffic is not enough. You need to kind of think about a little bit more bigger picture. So a good first few steps would be definitely getting the homepage and creating an AMP version of that. Another good space to start is thinking about where the landing pages that your organic and your referral pages are leading you to, and trying and getting an AMP version of that. So also when you think about it, like you land on an AMP page and from there you are bouncing off to a non-AMP page, that might also not create a very seamless experience. So try and have every AMP page, all the links on that also would lead to an AMP page. So these are kind of like tips with respect to traffic. Next slide. Talking about AMP implementation and UX. So we've spoken a little bit about AMP already. So how do you get onto it? Next slide. It definitely is and can be very easy. A lot of the popular CMSs have kind of come in collaboration with Google, and we have launched the ampproject.org, which if you are on any of the CMS listed, please look that up, and it'll talk you through detailed steps of how you get onto AMP. In fact, WordPress has even taken it a step forward, and it is as seamless as just installing a plugin. And we'll share this later, which is just the WordPress plugin, and then you have AMP pages from a non-AMP. So it can be as simple and as seamless as that, which is the way forward that we're going with this. Next slide. So then comes the aspect about AMP experience and AMP UX. So again, just kind of reminding you to think about the big picture and how your overall UX is on AMP versus non-AMP. So touching upon those few things from before is, are all the new content pages that you are creating, are they AMP or not? When you're thinking about your top traffic, where people lead, this might be your most popular products or your or certain posts that are very popular amongst your audience. So that is again something that you need to think about. And again, going back to that seamless integration between having an AMP page and that leading to another AMP page to close the circle. So those are aspects that I would definitely recommend you to think about. Moving on to ads implementation on AMP. Next slide. So when you think about what does AMP offer, there is a wide range of flexibility that is coming onto AMP, even though it's just been 2 years since launch. You have very similar control as what you have on non-AMP. So the monetization pretty much works in an extremely similar basis. You have a lot of control of your ad inventory, on where you place ads and how you place ads and how you sell it. So it's extremely similar. And when you think about it, even right now, we're constantly bringing on new partners on to be able to sell AMP inventory. And we have over 100 ad exchanges listed currently. Next slide. Even with ad formats, we have a broad range of ads. You can pretty much do almost everything that you can do on non-AMP. And currently, we are offering everything from sticky ads to promoted content to video ads. So it definitely is offering the entire spectrum. So that does not need to be any apprehension that, oh, I'm doing this on a non-AMP, and if I can, is AMP offering exactly the same thing? So it does. And moving on to next slide. When you think about comparing the performance of AMP and non-AMP, and I'm going to touch upon a few points that you need to consider. The first one is ad density. So comparing the same means they have to be of similar performance standards. So when you do launch AMP, I recommend that you have the same number of ad slots, the same sizes, very similar ad density that you are using, and also keeping in line with the optimal number of ads recommended per page. So with a combination of that, you could then potentially see the significant results that we were talking about earlier. Next slide. Another aspect to consider is also the AMP inventory. So there is a very similar demand that you can use on AMP compared to non-AMP. So you can do everything that you did. So for example, sponsorship, price priority, programmatic guaranteed, preferred deals. You can do all of that on AMP too. So when you launch parallelly or very similar to how you are currently doing on non-AMP to see if the performance is comparable. Next slide. Just kind of, again, noteworthy that it has been only a couple of years, but we've already very strongly got on so many different features on AMP. So to give you an overview, we already touched upon some of the ad formats. You can do fluid, responsive ads. You can do auto ads. And also the DMP integration, that's also fairly recently live, exchange bidding, kind of just giving you the super comprehensive overview of what you can do. And it is quite wide, and it is constantly increasing. So every year we're adding more and more things onto this. So with that, I'm gonna move on to Jatin for some AMP Mythbusters. And thank you so much, and I hope you guys enjoyed this.
Thank you, Ash. Thank you for a very insightful presentation on AMP. It's heartening to see AMP adoption across both large and small publishers. But as with every new and evolving technology, there are always a bunch of questions, concerns that publishers have. So in this session, I'm going to talk about 5 frequently asked questions around AMP, and talk about if each one of them is actually a myth or a fact. So moving on to the first one that we hear from publishers, that AMP sites compromise design, right? When they compare AMP and non-AMP in terms of the functionality available, publishers tell us that, hey, AMP is not up to the mark, right? So is it a myth or a fact? Moving to the next slide, Yes, it's a myth. This isn't the case. It was probably a concern when we launched AMP a couple of years back, but thanks to the open source initiative and the AMP project website, we have a load of components that now can be added, which can mirror the same experience of a non-AMP website. For example, components like sidebar navigation menus, carousels, and social share components can be added to your AMP website now, which will make the experience as good as non-AMP. You can always refer AMP by example. It's a website which has implementation tips on each of these components which I spoke about. One quick tip here is that there are a lot of automated plugins available in the market. These create cut down versions of your website. So you might think that the AMP experience is not as great as non-AMP, but refer to the AMP project website or AMP by example for implementation tips. Moving on, the second question that we hear from publishers is that monetization and performance on AMP isn't great. So is it a myth or a fact? Moving on to the next slide. It's a myth. Aishwarya spoke about a few things that you need to fix when it comes to AMP performance on monetization. Two things stand out, right? One is ad density on AMP pages. The second is demand parity on AMP pages, right? As long as both of these are in comparison to the non-AMP pages, we see that the AMP performance is actually better than non-AMP. 70% of publishers after adopting AMP have seen higher viewability. AMP viewability is in the range of 60 to 70%, which is much higher than non-AMP, where the viewability is between around 30 to 40%. Thanks to the higher viewability, publishers also report higher CTRs. CTRs on AMP pages are roughly 2 to 3x of non-AMP pages. And thanks to higher viewability and CTR, this results in higher ECPMs as well. One tip for looking at AMP performance compared to non-AMP is that if you're using Google Ad Manager, compare ad request CPMs instead of ad impression CPMs. The reason I say that is that the fill rates on AMP are usually higher. So therefore, the ad request CPMs would look much better if you compare AMP and non-AMP. Moving on to question number 3. We hear that first-party cookies are inaccessible on AMP, and hence, there's an apprehension of using AMP pages. So is it a myth or a fact? Yes, you guessed it right. It's again a myth. Real-time configuration, RTC, or as we call it, is a feature available in AMP thanks to a technology called FastFetch. This can be used to access first-party cookies when AMP is served from the Google cache. So what this allows you is that you can use RTC to augment ad request with targeting info at runtime. So you can use any of first-party cookies to target effectively using this. AMP allows up to 5 callouts to a targeting server for each ad slot. So you can go ahead and use RTC. Please refer to GitHub or the DFP Help Center on how to use RTC. Moving on to question number 4, sorry. AMP doesn't work for e-commerce or dynamic content. Again, we've heard concerns here that AMP does not provide for functionalities required to work on a dynamic or an e-commerce website. So this is again clearly a myth. We've come a long way in terms of the components which are available. And we have classic examples of e-commerce websites which have seen excellent results on AMP. 2 examples I would like to cite here. Vigo, which is a travel site used popularly in Asia Pacific and the Middle East, and Greenvies, which is a French retailer. Both of them have seen mobile conversions almost double after using AMP. All of them have been using components like AMP bind and AMP list, which really help for loading dynamic content. And you also have the payment request API, where you can have a seamless checkout and a payment interface on AMP pages. There are a bunch of case studies on AMP project website, and we also have a blog post on the official AMP WordPress blog, which you can read in more detail about our strategy for e-commerce and how we're enabling a much more seamless experience with AMP. Moving on to the last question, which is exchange bidding doesn't work on AMP. Again, as you would have guessed it, it's a myth as well. Exchange bidding can be achieved through real-time configuration, so you can have real-time, server-side bidding between exchanges possible through real-time configuration, which I earlier spoke about, thanks to AMP. This is again a solve for need. While these were 5 questions that we heard from publishers around AMP, I'm looking forward to hearing more questions that you might have around AMP, and if you can break some of those myths as well in the next section on frequently asked questions. Over to you, Ajay, for the next session.
Yeah. Okay, thank you everyone who presented, and thank you everyone who's still dialed in. We really appreciate you taking the time to join us here. So we have a couple of questions that have come in, and we're really looking forward to the answers of these questions. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump straight into first an AMP question for Jatin. So pubs see higher bounce rate on AMP versus non-AMP pages. Why could this be, Jatin, if the user experience and everything is much better on AMP?
Sure, Ajay. That's again a question we hear often from publishers. So one probably unused thing is when publishers have AMP pages, all the outlinks are typically to a non-AMP page, right? And we've seen often that publishers have implemented different client IDs on both AMP and non-AMP page. So it might be the same user, it's just that it gets counted under a different client ID if the user moves from the AMP page to a non-AMP page. The workaround on that is to implement a Google AMP Client ID API. It's again available on the Help Center. And just ensure that you are not counting the same user who moves from AMP to non-AMP as a user who's bounced off. Once this implementation is done correctly by the publisher, we've typically seen that the engagement on AMP pages is much superior to non-AMP.
Okay, thank you. One more question for you, Jatin. Looks like everybody's on the AMP topic today. My site already loads very fast, sometimes under 3 seconds. What more can AMP offer me that I don't already get?
A great question again. If your site loads super fast already, you could probably do an A/B experiment and have AMP ready versions as well of the website, and do an A/B test and test it out. We've seen again that publishers have super fast loading websites, but when they do an A/B test and try out AMP, typically we've seen that the kind of performance that AMP delivers and the kind of support that AMP has, it scores marginally over their optimized websites as well, so to speak. So do an A/B test for yourself, see what works. There's no one mandate to speak of. It's something that you could try off.
Okay, thank you, Jatin. Last question around AMP is what ad units would you recommend to use on AMP, and can you share some insights around the position of these ad units?
Okay, so a very simple answer: nothing changes with AMP. Have the same strategy that you have for ad position, size, placement as non-AMP. We already had a bunch of great suggestions from Ben around viewability of ad units. So keep those those suggestions in mind while you're designing. Like Ash mentioned, there are 2 things to keep in mind. One is the same ad density on AMP pages as compared to non-AMP, and the second is demand parity. Yeah.
Okay. Now, thank you. The next question is for Dan from Publift. Dan, someone here wants to know what the difference between value CPM and rate is, and how does this affect how how the network performs?
Yep. So I think good question. One thing to clear up in my slides, I had rate CPM used in the image, but it's actually, I mean, the key differences between rate and value CPM is that value CPM is the actual cost or the impression value that you want your line item to compete with the networks. Rates more reporting purposes and whatnot. So if you actually want sort of the line item to compete and be used in dynamic allocation, so that's especially for your non-guaranteed stuff. So it might be a third-party network that you've set up. You'd actually use the value CPM. So a working example would be that we can go into the network's dashboard and see that they're getting a $1 CPM. You'd want to set that value CPM and DFP to align with that, not the rate.
Okay. Another question around DFP again is when they're asking about the GPT tags. They want to know that, like, if they are going to move to DFP, does that mean that they have to re-tag all of their stuff to GPT tags?
Yeah, so for DFP, I mean, I guess it depends on what the goal of the publisher is. If they're wanting to implement new ad units, then yes, they'd have to do that. I guess it depends on what their previous setup was. In this instance, let's assume they're coming from AdSense, then yes, you would come in. You can still serve AdSense through DFP, but the GPT tag would, the new tag would have to go on the publisher's page in the form of an ad unit. That way it can talk to DFP. One thing to note is once the tag's actually on the page, you can still campaign and manage your direct and programmatic orders and line items to that one ad unit. So it's a small bit of setup at the start, but once the tag's on the page, then it's completely fine.
Last question, Dan. What is the difference between running a sponsorship for my direct campaign versus running a roadblock? Can I not serve all the units on my sponsorship line item?
Yeah, so you can serve all the units, but you simply have to make sure that roadblocks are enabled and adjust the delivery. So for your sponsorship campaign, you could have it just served as only one or more. DFP is going to dynamically adjust depending on things such as dynamic allocation. So it could pick and choose what ad unit the creative is delivered to on the page. But by changing it to as many as possible or all in the actual delivery, then you're going to kind of guarantee that it's going to be served in the sense of a roadblock. An example would be you could have a sponsorship campaign with 2 rotating creatives. That doesn't and it could be served at one or more. That doesn't necessarily guarantee that on your page that you're going to get both of those creatives. One thing to also keep in mind with roadblocks is that if you have 5 ad units on the page, you generally want 5 creatives set up within your line item to match each ad unit on the page. Just to ensure.
Okay. Thanks a ton, Dan.
No worries.
Ben, our next question is for you. After auto ads, I feel like my coverage on my site has dropped. What could be the possible reasons for this? And is this something that I should be worried about?
Yeah, with auto ads, we really should break down into the actual title formats where the auto ads is being served. Auto ads is basically just an overall catch-all for everything. It includes native display and also some of the interstitials and also the sticky ads. So if there's a chance to break down into different formats to see the actual coverage and the eCPM of each, then it's much easier to decide whether the implementation is correct. And also, if we can see the active view of each of these broken down, then you can tell that, okay, maybe one ad unit is placed in a way that is not optimal, or maybe it should be lazy loaded, but is not, therefore not too many people see it. If the active view is low, then the system might not serve that much ad to that particular ad position. So therefore, the coverage could be lower that way. So also try the ad balancer to sort of tune the direct balance between the coverage and the eCPM to see if we can strike a higher overall ad request eCPM. So and also one thing to watch out for is the coverage is just one part of the equation. So make sure you look at all the other things. Overall ad request eCPM is the most important. the ad CPM have to be multiplied by the coverage and everything else in order to make sense. So yeah, that's that. So break down by ad formats would be my answer.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ben. The next question is, where can I find the reporting breakdown for auto ads to see what kind of ads are being served on my pages? And there is a second part to the question, which is, would you recommend enabling all the available formats for auto ads and letting the system decide, or would you recommend starting with a few and then moving on to more based on testing?
Okay, first I would recommend to turn all of them on, and from looking at the detailed report that you asked about, then to decide whether they are good or not. But one thing before we go to the report is, just because one format doesn't seem to perform as well as the other ones, we also have to look at where these ads are actually showing up, because these are auto ads. Google have a way of figuring out where to show them. Sometimes we really have to check the site many times using different devices and all that to really understand where they're really showing up. And also use different, even drill into the creative size to make sure that what we think is what it is actually showing up the correct way. In terms of the actual report, I actually have to get back to you on that one. Or maybe Publift, do you guys have the answer of exactly where that report is in essence?
Yeah, so the thing is, that report can be found in the ad behavior tab. So you can just go to the ad behavior and look at the ad formats and break down the report from there. Anyway, guys, this is we are a little over time. Just so if you have any more questions, please send them in and we will try to respond to you. We will add the link to the presentation in the description of this video. So you can use that to sort of look at the slides that we presented and go over more in detail. Feel free to reach out to either Google, Publift, or Acqua Media for anything that you may need in the future. Just to quickly recap from what we've learned today, I think one of the big highlights to remember is native ads, when used in the same position in the article, are better performing than display ads which are in the article. So make sure if you have an article that within the article you're using native, because we have seen examples of uplift of 15 to 20%. The second thing is make sure to try auto ads. And as Ben pointed out, about 90% of your revenue comes from less than 20% of your ads. And a good way to figure out what percentage of your revenue is coming from what percentage of your units is basically to use the ad balance tool. Go to your My Ad section on AdSense and check out the ad balance tool. It will tell you how many ad units you can reduce before your revenue actually starts getting affected. I think this sort of ties into what we discussed related to AMP and the whole UX that we discussed today. Once you reduce the number of ad units, it means that the hard-coded tags on your page reduce. And once that you reduce all those ad units and you just add the auto ads tag, what happens is your page begins to load faster, the user experience becomes better, and the ad will trigger only if the demand is right. So this way you can always make sure that your performance is not lost because you've retained your revenue. And then the second part is if there is any incremental revenue, you will get it from auto ads. Also moving on to the DFP section, please make sure to set up your line items accurately and please make sure to prioritize them. As Dan mentioned, Publift has a great platform solution called Fuse, which can help you make all your ad implementations and your basic navigations around DFP a lot better. So please do check that out and give them a call. Lastly, AMP. As we learned today, there are a lot of things that are possible on AMP, and AMP provides great user experience. And my biggest takeaway today is that AMP is not only for people who have a lot of search traffic. It can work with people who have a lot of search or any kind of traffic. It can work for e-commerce. It can work for news. It can work with people who have video, any of this stuff, because it supports everything. And we have seen a lot of great results. And like Jatin and Aish mentioned, the real detail is in the way you're looking at the reporting, because we are often just looking at one single overview and not looking at the overall picture. So please remember, ad request CPM is something that you need to keep in mind. Having said this, thank you all for taking the time to join us today. We look forward to doing more such collaborations for you. We will send out a feedback form And if you guys have any questions that you would like to discuss with us, and anything that you want us to cover going forward in the future sessions, or if you want to have more sessions like this, please get in touch with us. We would love to hear from you. And thank you once again. My name is Ajay, and we're doing the channel partner live stream with Publift and Acqua Media. And we hope you have a great week. Cheers.